6 weeks before I handed my daughter the power of attorney, she had been asking me to sign for 3 months. I drove to the laundromat on Crescent Road because my washing machine had been making a sound like something dying inside it, and I had not yet called anyone to fix it. I had been putting off a lot of things since my husband passed. That was the truth of it, plain and without decoration. Bernard died 14 months before that Tuesday morning, and the year in between had been the kind of year that makes you understand why people describe grief as weather. You don't navigate it, you just wait for it to change. The laundromat on Crescent Road was the same one I had used in 1987, when Bernard and I first moved to Kessler Falls and couldn't afford a washer yet. It still had the same orange plastic chairs and the same bulletin board by the door with coupons and lost cat flyers pinned 3 layers deep. The woman who ran it now was named Bet. Not the same Bet from 30 years ago, but her daughter, who had her mother's same habit of folding other people's forgotten laundry without being asked. I was loading the second machine when Bet appeared at my elbow and said, quietly, without any preamble at all, "Your daughter was in here last Saturday with a man I didn't recognize. They sat in the back corner for 40 minutes. I don't think they knew I could hear them from the utility room." I looked at her. "I almost called you," she said. "I kept going back and forth, but I figured. You come in on Tuesdays." She handed me a folded piece of paper. Her handwriting, the date, 3 lines of notes she had written down before she forgot. I stood there with a wet towel in my hands and read what she had written. The man's name was Clifton Reed. He was, according to what Bet had overheard, a financial planning consultant my daughter had found through someone at her office. He had a folder on her lap, and she had a folder on his, and they were talking about me the way people talk about real estate. Square footage, value per unit, projected timeline. She said the POA would be active by end of month, Bet told me. He said once it was active and the investment accounts were retitled, the annual management fee structure would be invisible to. She paused, looked at her note. Invisible to the account holder. That's what he said, word for word. I thanked her. I put the towel in the machine. I started it. I drove home the long way, down Elmwood and past the park where Bernard and I used to walk on Sunday mornings, past the elementary school where I had substituted for 11 years before my knees made standing all day unreasonable. I drove slowly because I needed the time and because I was afraid that if I stopped moving, something would break open in me that I was not ready to deal with in a parking lot. My daughter, 43 years old, the child I had taught to read at the kitchen table using flashcards I made myself because the teacher said she was falling behind and I refused to accept that. The woman who had called me every Sunday for the past 14 months and asked how I was eating, whether I was sleeping, whether I needed her to come down. The woman who, 3 months ago, had sat across from me at that same kitchen table and said, very gently, "Mom, I've been thinking about your finances. I just want to make sure you're protected. Dad would have wanted that." I had been touched. I had said, "Let me think about it." I had been thinking about it. I just hadn't signed anything yet. The house was the one Bernard and I bought in 1994. A craftsman bungalow on the north side of Kessler Falls, Tennessee, with a front porch that faced west so we could watch the evening come in, and a backyard big enough for the garden Bernard kept every summer until the summer he couldn't anymore. He had built the raised beds himself, lumber and hardware cloth, and I had not been able to take them down. They were still out there, empty now, the soil dry and cracked, holding the shape of a life that had moved on without us. I stood in the kitchen and looked at the backyard for a long time. Then I called my friend Nadette. Nadette Cowell had been my neighbor on Birch Street for 22 years before she moved across town to be closer to her grandchildren. We had been each other's emergency contact, each other's hurricane companion, each other's person in the way that women who go through the same seasons of life become each other's person. She answered before it finished the first ring, which told me she had been waiting for me to need something. I told her everything. She listened without interrupting, which was not her natural instinct, which meant she understood immediately that this was serious. When I finished, she said, "You need to talk to Harlan's wife." Harlan Pickard had been Bernard's oldest friend from before I even knew Bernard existed. His wife, Suzette, had spent 30 years as a paralegal in estate law before she retired. She was not a lawyer, but she knew what lawyers knew, and she knew what she was looking at when she looked at a document. I called Suzette at 8 o'clock that evening. She listened the way Nadette had listened, carefully and without interruption. When I was done, she said, "Do not sign anything. Do not tell your daughter anything has changed. Come to my house tomorrow morning and bring every piece of paper this Clifton Reed has given you." He had given me a packet 3 weeks earlier. A trust summary, an investment account retitling form, and a management services agreement that I had read once and put aside because the language felt like trying to read through fog. I had told myself I would read it again when I felt sharper. Grief does that. It makes you distrust your own mind, and then you start delegating the decisions you used to make without thinking. I put the packet in my tote bag and did not sleep until almost 4 in the morning. I lay in the bedroom where Bernard had died and looked at the ceiling and tried to hold 2 things at once. The daughter I knew, and the conversation Bet had written down on a piece of paper. Suzette met me at her door at 8 with coffee and reading glasses already on. She read the management services agreement first, then the trust summary, then the retitling form, going back twice to certain pages, making small marks in the margins with a pencil she kept behind her ear. She set everything down and looked at me. "The management fee is in Section 3, Paragraph 4, she said. "It's written as a percentage of assets under management, compounded annually, with a separate transaction fee on any movement over $5,000. On your retirement accounts alone, if the numbers your daughter mentioned are accurate, you are looking at somewhere between $14,000 and $18,000 a year in fees you would never see itemized anywhere." She tapped the signature page. "Did your daughter explain this structure to you?" "No." "Did Reed?" "He said it was standard." Suzette took off her reading glasses. "It is not standard. It is a fee structure designed to be noticed only by someone specifically looking for it. The language here mirrors, almost exactly, a case I worked on 12 years ago. Different advisor, different family. That woman lost a significant portion of her retirement income over 4 years before her accountant found it." I asked what had happened to that woman. Suzette was quiet for a moment. She never fully recovered financially. She was 71 by the time anyone understood what had been taken. The room was very still. "What do I do?" I said. Suzette picked up her phone. "I'm calling a man named Delvecchio. Vincent Delvecchio. He worked financial crimes for the state attorney's office for 18 years before he went private. He's retired now mostly, but he does consulting for situations like this. He's thorough, and he doesn't make noise until there's something worth making noise about." She made the call while I sat at her kitchen table and looked at Bernard's handwriting on the back of an old church bulletin I found in my tote bag. A grocery list from maybe 2 years ago. Things we needed for Sunday dinner, written in his careful cursive. I don't know why I was carrying it. I carry a lot of things I don't mean to carry. Vincent Delvecchio arrived at my house the following morning in a gray Carhartt jacket that made him look like a man who fixed furnaces rather than financial fraud. He was 68, unhurried, and had the quality of someone who had learned not to react to anything until he had the full picture. I told him everything from the beginning. He took notes in a small spiral notebook, asked questions that were specific and without judgment, and when I finished, he said, "May I keep copies of those documents?" I gave him the packet. He said, "Tell me about your daughter's husband." "My son-in-law." I thought about how to answer honestly. He was not a bad man. That had always been my assessment, and I held on to it carefully now, the way you hold something fragile. He was a man who deferred to my daughter in most things, who worked in logistics for a company outside Nashville, who had been unfailingly polite to me and genuinely good to their children. I had never had cause to doubt him. "I don't believe he's the origin of this," I said. Vincent looked at his notebook. "Where does your son-in-law think his wife's relationship with Clifton Reed originated?" I did not know. I realized I did not know a great deal about how Reed had come into my daughter's orbit. She had said someone at her office. That was the extent of what she told me. Vincent made a note. "That's the thread I'll pull first." He left, and I spent the afternoon doing things that needed doing. Dishes? Laundry now that the machine was running again. Deadheading the roses on the front porch that had bloomed in spite of me paying them no attention. I was in the garden when my daughter called. Her regular Wednesday call. And I answered and spoke to her for 22 minutes about her children's swim lessons, and a recipe she'd tried, and a documentary Bernard would have liked, and I gave her nothing in my voice, nothing at all. And I thought afterward that this must be what it feels like to carry something very heavy in a very small space inside yourself. That night I slept in the chair in Bernard's study, the reading chair he'd ordered from a catalog and assembled himself on a Saturday afternoon in 2009, with no help from the instructions. I thought about what I knew about my daughter. She had been, for the past 14 months, the child I watched most closely. Not because I doubted her, but because she was the one who showed worry as action. When she was afraid, she managed things. When she couldn't manage things, she found someone who could. After Bernard died, she had done everything right. Made calls, arranged the service, handled his accounts alongside me, never once let me feel alone in the paperwork of death. But she had also, quietly, started treating my decisions as things to be organized rather than made. It had begun as helpfulness. That was the part I needed to hold on to understand what might have happened. Vincent called on Thursday evening. He said, "I need to come by Friday with some information. Can you have your lawyer present?" I did not have a lawyer. Suzette gave me a name, Pauline Abner, who had practiced elder law for 26 years and was, Suzette said, exactly who you want in a room when a document is being taken apart. Pauline Abner arrived at my house Friday at 9. She was 57, wore no jewelry, and read Vincent's materials the way Suzette had read the trust packet. Twice, slowly, with small marks in pencil. She did not speak until she was finished. Vincent had found 3 things. The first was Clifton Reed's history. He had a financial advisory license in Tennessee and 2 neighboring states, a website with professional photography and testimonials, and a regulatory complaint filed with the Tennessee Department of Commerce and Insurance in 2020 that was resolved by a consent order. Not a criminal matter, but a civil finding of misleading fee disclosure. He had paid a fine. His license had not been suspended. He had continued practicing. 2 of the clients named in the original complaint were women in their late 60s who had recently lost spouses. The pattern was not subtle. The second was the connection to my daughter. She had not found him through someone at her office. She had been introduced to him by a woman in her book club, whose mother had used Reed's services for 2 years. That woman had, in the process of the introduction, mentioned that my daughter's mother had a house, a pension, and retirement accounts from 30 years of teaching. My daughter had shared this information in the normal way that people share information in book clubs, not as a target profile. But Reed had noted it. The third thing was the worst. There was a psychiatric referral in the materials Reed had given my daughter, not presented as such, framed as a comprehensive senior wellness assessment, from a Dr. Warren Briggs, who was a general practitioner with a secondary certification in geriatric care. His name appeared on a referral form inside the Management Services Agreement packet, in a section labeled Optional Coordinated Services for Trust Participants. The assessment was listed as complimentary, as part of Reed's onboarding process. Vincent said, "Dr. Briggs has conducted capacity assessments for 4 other Reed clients in the past 3 years. 2 of those clients subsequently had their trust documents challenged, not by outsiders but by the advisor's office, on the grounds of the assessment findings." Pauline set down the folder. She looked at me. "If you had signed the power of attorney and the management agreement," she said. And then Briggs filed a capacity assessment suggesting early cognitive decline. The ability to challenge any distribution from your accounts would have been transferred to the trustee, Reed's office, pending a legal review that would have taken, at minimum, 18 months and significant legal cost to contest. I sat with that. "Your daughter," Pauline said carefully. "Is she aware of Dr. Briggs?" "I don't know." "That is the question," Vincent said. "Whether she was shown the full scope of this arrangement or a portion of it." I thought about my daughter. I thought about the way she worried, the way she organized, the way she had loved her father and could not tolerate not being able to fix what losing him had done to us. I thought about how easy it would have been for someone to show her a version of this that looked like protection, that spoke her specific language of helpfulness and control, that asked her to do nothing except introduce her mother to a professional who would handle the details. That night, I made the decision in the same chair I'd made it in, the one that smelled faintly of Bernard's wood smoke and the particular cedar of his aftershave. I was not going to call my daughter before the signing. I was not going to let the people who had built this structure around my grief disassemble it quietly and disappear. I thought about the women before me, the one from the 2020 complaint, the 2 who'd had their documents challenged. I thought about who came after me if this continued undisturbed. I called Pauline the next morning. I said, "I want to reschedule the POA signing for Monday at my house." Tell my daughter it's because I finally feel ready. I need a weekend. Pauline said, and Monday? Monday, I said, I want to finish it. I spent Sunday making my grandmother's peach cobbler. The recipe with the butter dropped in hot before the batter. The one that takes 45 minutes and makes the kitchen smell like every summer I can remember. Bernard always said that smell was the reason he'd agreed to move south. I cooked it for nobody in particular. Or maybe for everyone who was about to be in this house. Or maybe for myself. Because there are things you do to tell yourself you are still here and still capable and still the person who stands at the stove and makes the things that matter. Nadette arrived at 11 Sunday morning. Suzette arrived at noon. My son-in-law's mother, a woman named Josephine who had driven from Bowling Green because I had called her the night before and told her enough that she said, I'll be there, before I finished the sentence. She arrived at 12:30. I had not known her well before Bernard died. I knew her better now. She was the kind of woman who showed up. Pauline arrived at 1 with her associate. Vincent sat in the corner with his folder and his notebook and that same unreadable patience. My daughter's car pulled into the driveway at 2:50. I watched from the front window. She was wearing the blue coat she saved for occasions she wanted to look composed. And she was carrying the folder of my documents that she had asked to hold for safekeeping 2 months ago. Clifton Reed's car pulled in behind hers. My son-in-law was not with her. She had told him, I learned later, that this was a simple family administrative matter and that he didn't need to come. I understood, hearing that, the care with which all of this had been managed. I opened the door and smiled at my daughter and let her hug me. You look good, Mom, she said. She meant it. She was not, I understood with a particular grief, performing. She believed she was doing a good thing. I led them into the dining room. Clifton Reed took in the number of people in the room with one quick assessment and recovered his composure in the same breath. He was 61, silver-haired, the kind of tailored casual that costs more than it looks like it does. He set his briefcase on the floor and smiled at me with the practiced warmth of a man who had done this many times. Gloria, he said, using my name with the familiarity of someone who had been told to use it. Before we begin, I'd like to walk you through the final documents one more time. Make sure everyone understands where we are. I'd like to say something first, I said. He gestured for me to proceed. I looked at my daughter. She was watching me with the careful, slightly braced expression she had worn since she was 9 years old and suspected she was about to be told something she didn't want to hear. Your father sat in this room the last good summer he had, I said. We were at this table and he said, Glo, when I'm gone, don't let anybody tell you that you need managing. You never have. I told him I wouldn't. I paused. I kept that promise this week. My daughter went very still. I nodded to Vincent. He placed 3 folders on the table. I looked at Clifton Reed. The management fee in your services agreement is in Section 3, Paragraph 4. It is embedded in 4 paragraphs of administrative language and represents between $14,000 and $18,000 annually from my accounts. You did not disclose it to my daughter. She does not know it's there. My daughter turned to him. What does she mean? Reed said. Gloria, I think there's been a mischaracterization of Pauline said clearly. The fee structure is on page 11, Mr. Reed. We've reviewed the consent order filed with the Tennessee Department of Commerce and Insurance in 2020, in which you were found to have engaged in misleading fee disclosure with 2 clients. Both were widows. Both were in their late 60s. The structure used in those cases is the same structure in this document. My daughter was looking at the folder Vincent had placed in front of her. She was reading. She read the way she had always read. Fast, thorough, with a small vertical line forming between her eyebrows when something didn't add up. She looked up at Reed. I said, the comprehensive senior wellness assessment listed on page 17 of your onboarding packet is a cognitive capacity evaluation from Dr. Warren Briggs. Dr. Briggs has assessed 4 of your other clients in the past 3 years. 2 of those clients subsequently had their ability to challenge distributions from their accounts removed pending legal review based on his findings. He was not going to assess my wellness. He was going to provide documentation that could be used to question my capacity to revoke anything I signed today. The room was completely silent. Reed stood. I think this has moved significantly outside of what we're here to discuss today. Vincent said without raising his voice, Please sit down, Mr. Reed. I've been in contact with the Tennessee Department of Commerce and Insurance over the course this week. There are 2 investigators currently parked outside this house who were briefed this morning. If you choose to leave, that call will be made. Reed sat down. My daughter was still looking at the folder. She had not spoken since she'd turned to read. Her composure was intact, just barely, the way a surface holds when the structure underneath it has shifted. I said her name. She looked at me. The book club, I said. Eleanor Marsh introduced you to him after he'd already been told about my retirement accounts, my pension, and this house. You didn't bring him a client. He identified you as an entry point. Her face changed. I think you believed this was protection, I said. I think someone spoke your language back to you. Worry, helpfulness, doing the right thing before it was too late. And you followed where it led because you were grieving your father and trying to do something useful with that grief. I know how that feels. I have been trying to do something useful with mine for 14 months, she said very quietly. Mom, I didn't know about the doctor. I know, I said. I didn't know about the fees. He told me the management structure was standard, I said. He told me the same thing. She looked at the folder. She looked at Reed. Something moved across her face that I recognized from when she was a child, the expression she made when she realized she had trusted someone she shouldn't have, and the trust had been used. Pauline said, Clifton Reed, you are being referred to the Tennessee Department of Commerce and Insurance for investigation of financial elder abuse, fraudulent fee concealment, and predatory targeting of bereaved clients. Dr. Briggs is being referred separately to the Tennessee Board of Medical Examiners. We are recommending that the Department of Justice Financial Crimes Unit receive the full case file. She looked at him steadily. Reed did not speak. He gathered his briefcase with the movements of a man who had already decided to say nothing without an attorney present. And he walked to the front door and he let himself out. The two investigators followed him. The room was very quiet. My daughter had not moved. She was sitting with both hands flat on the table and looking at the place Reed had been. Josephine, her mother-in-law, got up without a word and came around the table and put both hands on my daughter's shoulders. It was such a simple human thing to do. I was grateful for it. In the months that followed, the quiet of the house on the north side of Kessler Falls rearranged itself into something more honest. Bet from the laundromat called once to ask how things had turned out, and I told her the short version and she said, "Good," in a way that closed the thing properly. Clifton Reed surrendered his Tennessee license in January, pending the state investigation. 3 additional former clients came forward through the process, all of them women, all of them in the first 2 years of widowhood. One of them was still trying to recover funds she'd lost across 4 years of compounded fees she'd never been shown. Dr. Briggs was placed under review by the medical board in February. His attorney issued a statement that said nothing. My daughter and I talked, really talked, for the first time in a long time, at the kitchen table the week after the signing that hadn't happened. She told me that she had been afraid, since her father died, that she was going to lose me too, and that the fear had curdled, without her noticing, into a certainty that I needed to be acted on rather than spoken to. She said she was sorry. She said she was seeing a counselor now who was helping her understand why loss made her reach for control. I told her that the door had not been entirely open from my side either, that I had managed grief by going quiet, and quiet can look, from the outside, like a person fading. I told her that her father had always said she loved too hard in the wrong direction, that she aimed her love at problems instead of people. She laughed a little, and it was her real laugh, the one that sounded like Bernard's. My son-in-law came the following Sunday with their children. We had peach cobbler and the kids ran themselves ragged in the backyard. And he and I sat on the porch and he said, I should have known more about what she was going through. I should have asked. I told him that was a good thing to know about yourself. He nodded and we sat there watching the evening come in across the porch, railing the way Bernard and I used to. And I thought that some things hold their shape even when everything inside them has changed. I had a cognitive evaluation done in December at the neurology clinic at the university. Voluntary, self-requested. With a physician I found myself. The report was clean. High normal range across all assessed functions, the doctor told me, and she said it with the particular matter-of-factness of someone who had expected to find exactly that. I did not frame the report, but I kept it in the top drawer of Bernard's desk, where I could find it on the days when grief makes you wonder whether what you are feeling is ordinary sadness or something slower and more permanent. It is ordinary sadness. There is, it turns out, a difference. On a Sunday in late January, I drove to the cemetery and sat with Bernard for a while. The oaks were bare and the grass was winter pale and the sky had that low gray ceiling. That means more cold coming. I told him about the dining room table and the 3 folders and Reed's face when Vincent told him to sit back down. I told him our daughter was going to be all right. I told him the house was still ours. The wind moved through the bare trees and I sat there until my hands were cold, and then I drove home along Route 12, past the school where I had stood in other people's classrooms for 11 years, past the park, over the bridge, up the hill, and into the driveway where the garden beds Bernard built were already beginning to soften in the January thaw. I went inside. I made coffee. I sat at the kitchen table in the particular silence that has my name on it, and I thought about what it means to protect the life you built, not by handing it to someone else for safekeeping, but by being the one who stays awake and pays attention and asks the questions and trusts. Finally, the mind that has been thinking your thoughts for 67 years. It has not led me wrong yet.